This is English shorthand dictation number 208 and the dictation speed is 120 words per minute. Ready? Start. Sir, I am not against trade unions. They serve a very useful purpose. But it would be a great mistake to suppose that trade unions are a panacea for all the ills of labor. Trade unions, even if they are powerful, are not strong enough to compel capitalists to run capitalism better. Trade unions would be much more effective if they had behind them a labor government to rely on. Unless the trade unionism aims at controlling the government, trade unions will do very little good to the workers and will be a source of perpetual fights among trade union leaders. Another sin of the laboring classes is the easy way in which they are led away by an appeal to nationalism. The working classes, who are beggared in every way and who have very little to spare, often sacrifice their all to the so-called cause of nationalism. They have never cared to inquire whether the nationalism for which they are to make their offerings will give them social and economic equality. More often than not, the free independent national state which emerges from a successful nationalism and which grows on their sacrifices turns to be the enemy of the working class under the leadership of their masters. This is the worst kind of exploitation that labor has allowed itself to be subjected to. If the working classes have to live under a system of parliamentary democracy, then it must devise the best possible means to turn it to their benefit. As far as I can see, two things are necessary if this object is to be achieved. First thing to do is to discard mere establishment of trade unions as the final aim and object of labor in India. It must declare that its aim is to put labor in charge of the government. For this, it must organize a labor party as a political party. Such a party will no doubt cover trade unions in its organization, but it must be free from the narrow and cramping vision of trade unionism, with its stress on the immediate gain at the cost of ultimate benefit, and with the vested right of trade union officials to represent labor. It must equally dissociate itself from communal or capitalistic political parties, simply because these bodies claim to be fighting for the freedom of India. Labor, by a separate political organization of its ranks, can serve both the purposes. It can fight the battle of India's freedom better by freeing itself from the clutches of such bodies. It can prevent itself from being defrauded in the name of nationalism. The second thing for labor in India to realize is that without knowledge there is no power. When a labor party is formed in India and when such a party puts forth its claim to be voted to power before the electorate, the question is sure to be asked whether labor is fit to govern. It would be no answer to say that labor could not govern worse or display greater bankruptcy in home or foreign affairs than the other classes. Labor will have to prove positively that it can govern better. Let it not be forgotten that the pattern of labor government is more difficult than that of the other classes. A labor government cannot be a government of laissez-faire. It will be a government which must essentially be based on a system of control. A system of control needs a far greater degree of knowledge and training than a laissez-faire government does. Unfortunately, labor in India has not realized the importance of study. All that labor leaders in India have done is to learn how best to abuse industrialists. Abuse and more abuse has become an obsession for them. I am therefore very glad to find that the Indian Federation of Labour has recognized this defect and has come forward to open these study circles for the laboring classes. They are going to be the most effective means of making labor fit to govern. I hope the Federation will not forget the other necessity, namely to inaugurate a Labour Party. When this is done, the Federation will deserve the thanks of the laboring classes to have raised them to the status of a governing class. Sir, the motion is merely for circulation for the purpose of eliciting public opinion on this measure. That being so, it seems to me unnecessary to take the time of the House to deal in any detailed manner with the provisions which are embodied in this bill. It is enough, I think, to tell the House what the main features of the bill are and what has led the government to undertake this particular piece of legislation. The bill has three important features. In the first place, the bill seeks to compel an employer to recognize a trade union. In the second place, the bill imposes certain conditions on a trade union in order to make the trade union worthy of recognition by an employer. The third feature of the bill is to make non-recognition by an employer of a trade union which has observed all the conditions prescribed in this measure and which has therefore qualified itself for recognition, an offence which is made punishable by law. As I said, it is unnecessary to discuss the merits of this measure. The motion is for circulation, which obviously means that the provisions embodied in the bill by the government at the present stage are only tentative. There is no finality about it, and the government does not propose to make these provisions final unless they have received the opinions of leaders of labor, employers, provincial governments, and other parties who are concerned in this measure. The bill may therefore be quite different from what it is now, when the government has applied its mind to the various suggestions that it hopes to receive as a result of circulation. All that I propose to say is to tell the House what has led the government of India to take this responsibility upon its shoulders. The House will recall that this matter was considered and great deal of attention was devoted to the question of the recognition of trade unions by employer, and all those honorable members who have read the report of the Royal Commission on Labour will realize what great emphasis the Royal Commission laid on the recognition of trade unions as a measure for the healthy growth of trade unions and for amicable relations between employers and workers. The House will also remember that the Royal Commission at that stage stated that they would very much desire if the recognition was achieved voluntarily by the consent of the employers without any legal obligation upon them. The House will also remember that the Royal Commission had submitted its report 12 years ago and there has been no willingness on the part of employers to recognize trade union voluntarily. Indeed, the objections which the employers made before the Royal Commission for opposing the recognition of trade unions are still the objections which the employers are pressing for non-recognition. Consequently, the situation has certainly not improved.